The wind that night felt like 1,000 tiny needles against the skin. Snowflakes swirled through the dark sky, sticking to the cracked pavement and the frozen bus stop sign. The streets were almost empty. Only a few cars passed now and then, their headlights sweeping across the slush and steam rising from manholes. It was close to midnight and the city felt half asleep, half abandoned. On the edge of the street, a young woman stood alone, her gloved hands tucked deep inside her coat pockets. The coat wasn't really a coat anymore, thin, faded, and patched on one sleeve. She stamped her feet lightly, trying to keep the blood moving, but it didn't help much. The bus was late again. Or maybe it wasn't coming at all. Her name was Emily Carter, 26 years old, a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital downtown. She had just finished a 14-hour shift, the kind that left her legs shaking and her eyes heavy. Her scrubs were hidden under her jacket, but her hospital ID still hung around her neck, brushing against her chest when the wind pushed against her. She could have taken a taxi, but she couldn't afford it. Her rent had gone up again, her brother's medical bills were due next week, and she had already skipped dinner to make the numbers work. She looked down the empty road. The last bus should have arrived 20 minutes ago. The snow was falling harder now, soft flakes clinging to her hair and eyelashes. She pulled her hood up and hugged herself tighter. Around her, the world was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that made you feel small and forgotten. A car came around the corner, its headlights slicing through the storm. Emily didn't pay much attention at first. People in cars never stopped for someone like her. But this car slowed down as it neared the bus stop, then rolled to a full stop right in front of her. The window on the passenger side lowered halfway and warm air spilled out into the cold night. Inside sat a man, maybe mid-30s, dressed in a black coat and a scarf that looked expensive without trying. His face was calm, sharp features, but there was something soft in his eyes. Curiosity, maybe. He leaned slightly toward the window and spoke, his voice deep but even. "Are you waiting for the bus?" Emily blinked, unsure how to respond. "Yeah," she said, her voice shaky from the cold. "It should have been here already." He glanced at the snow-covered street. "I don't think it's coming tonight," he said quietly. "They're probably shutting down the route because of the storm." Emily forced a small smile, half polite, half defeated. "Wouldn't surprise me. It's been doing that all week." The man looked at her for a moment. "You're freezing," he said. "You shouldn't be standing out here." She gave a quick laugh, short and tired. "Yeah, well, I don't have much choice." He hesitated, then unlocked the passenger door. "Get in, I'll give you a ride." Emily stiffened. She looked at the car, then at him. Every story her mother had ever told her about strangers flashed through her mind. "I can't," she stammered. "I don't even know you." "I understand," he said gently. "But I promise I'm not here to hurt you. You can keep your phone on. Call someone if it makes you feel better. Just, please, don't stay out here. It's below freezing." The sincerity in his tone threw her off. He didn't sound like someone trying to trick her. He sounded concerned, but still she hesitated. Her fingers were numb now. The snow was sticking to her hair and eyelashes. She couldn't feel her toes. Maybe just this once she could take a small risk. She looked into the car again. It was warm inside, faint music playing through the speakers. The man's hands were still on the steering wheel. He wasn't making any sudden moves. Finally she nodded. "Okay," she said softly. "Just until we find a bus or somewhere open." "That's fine," he said, relief flickering in his eyes. "Come on." She climbed into the car slowly, brushing the snow from her jacket. The warmth hit her like a wave. Her body trembled as feelings started to return to her hands. The seat was soft, the kind of soft she hadn't felt in a long time. She closed the door and looked at him. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible. "You're welcome," he replied, putting the car in gear. "I'm Alexander." "Emily," she said. "Nice to meet you, Emily," he said, and smiled briefly before turning his eyes back to the road. They drove through the quiet streets, the snowflakes glowing under the headlights. Emily watched the city pass by, the closed shops, the flickering streetlights, the sleeping apartment buildings. She could hear the hum of the engine, steady and smooth, and for the first time that night her heart began to slow down. "Do you live far from here?" he asked after a minute. "About 20 minutes, she said. "If the bus was running." He nodded. "All right. I'll get you home." She hesitated. "You really don't have to. I can walk from the main road." "I'm not letting you walk in this weather," he said firmly, but his tone was still kind. "It's dangerous." Emily looked at him, studying his face. He didn't seem like the kind of man who did this often. Help strangers. His car smelled faintly of coffee and leather, and there was a laptop bag on the back seat. His coat looked like something from a designer store. Everything about him said success and order. She wondered what someone like him was doing out here so late. Were you working late? She asked. He nodded. Meeting ran over. I run a company downtown. We're closing a project this week. Oh, she said, surprised. You're a CEO? He chuckled softly. That's what they call me. But mostly it just means I never sleep. Emily smiled a little. I can relate to that. What do you do? He asked. I'm a nurse, she said quietly. At St. Mary's. He looked at her, a trace of admiration in his eyes. That's a hard job. Yeah, she said, letting out a breath. But someone has to do it. He glanced at her hands, cracked from constant washing, the faint red marks on her wrists from gloves worn too long. How long have you been working there? 3 years, she said. I started right after nursing school. It's not easy, but it's honest work. I like helping people. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic, as if helping people wasn't enough of an achievement. He noticed that. You help people for a living, he said. That's more than most, she shrugged. I try. They drove in silence for a while. The snow thickened, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. The city lights blurred into glowing dots behind the white curtain. Emily pressed her hands near the heater vent, letting the warm air soothe her numb fingers. You shouldn't have stopped, she said after a while, her tone hesitant. Most people wouldn't. Maybe they should, he replied. She smiled faintly. The world doesn't work like that anymore. He didn't answer right away. Maybe that's the problem. His words hung in the air. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Emily leaned her head back against the seat, feeling the exhaustion catch up with her. Her eyes were heavy, her body aching from standing and working all day. The hum of the car was oddly comforting. You can close your eyes if you want, he said. I'll wake you when we get close. I'm fine, she said, but her voice came out weak. Still, she fought the sleep, afraid to seem ungrateful, or worse, careless. Yet her eyelids kept drifting lower. The car's warmth and the steady rhythm of the road made it impossible to resist. She didn't know how long she dozed off. Maybe 5 minutes. Maybe more. When she opened her eyes again, the car was stopped at a red light. The snow was falling heavier now, blanketing everything in white. She looked around and realized they were only halfway to her neighborhood. The streets here were darker, narrower. Sorry, she murmured. Did I fall asleep? A little, he said, smiling faintly. You needed it, she rubbed her eyes. I didn't mean to. It's fine, he said. You look tired. She gave a tired laugh. I've been tired for about 3 years. He smiled again, but there was something thoughtful in his gaze. Why do you keep doing it then? Because I can't not do it, she said. People depend on me, and I guess it's the only thing I'm good at. I doubt that, he said. She looked at him surprised. You don't even know me. He met her eyes briefly before looking back at the road. Sometimes you don't need to. You can tell by the way someone talks about what they do. Emily didn't know how to respond. So she looked out the window instead, watching the flakes spin and melt against the glass. She hadn't realized how long it had been since someone said something kind to her, something that didn't come from pity. When they finally turned onto her street, Emily's chest tightened a little. The road was narrow and uneven, lined with old apartment buildings with flickering lights in their hallways. The snow made everything look softer than it was, hiding the cracks and broken steps. She pointed toward a small brick building at the end. That's me, she said. You can just stop here. Alexander slowed the car but didn't pull over right away. He looked at the building, at the dim light barely shining through the window of what must have been her apartment. Then he looked at her, noticing how her hands trembled again now that the heater wasn't blowing directly on them. You live here alone? He asked quietly. She nodded. Yeah, it's not great, but it's what I can afford. He didn't say anything for a moment. The snow was piling up on the windshield and the wipers squeaked as they cleared it away. Finally, he said, Emily, it's not safe to be walking around out here in this weather. The forecast says the storm's getting worse. I'll be fine, she said. I've handled worse nights. He looked unconvinced. You'll freeze before you get inside. Let me at least walk you up. You don't have to. I know, he said, cutting her off gently. But I want to. Something in his tone made her stop arguing. She nodded. Together they got out of the car. the cold air slapping them immediately. Emily pulled her hood tight as they trudged through the snow toward the building entrance. The steps were slippery and she nearly lost her balance before Alexander caught her arm, steadying her. "Careful," he said. "Thanks," she muttered, embarrassed. Inside the hallway, the heat barely worked. The light above flickered like it was on its last breath. Emily's apartment was on the second floor. She led the way, her footsteps echoing on the old wooden stairs. When they reached her door, she turned to face him. "Well," she said awkwardly, "thank you for the ride. Really, you didn't have to do that." He nodded. "You're welcome." She hesitated, searching for the right words. "You should get home before the snow gets worse." He looked at her for a long moment. "Emily," he said quietly, "you shouldn't be out here like this. You're exhausted, you're freezing, and this building—" He glanced around. "It's falling apart." She gave a small shrug. "It's home." He frowned slightly. "Let me at least get you something to eat. You look like you haven't had dinner." "I'm okay," she said quickly. "I'll make something small. Do you even have groceries?" He asked. She didn't answer. Her silence said enough. He exhaled, the kind of sigh that carried both concern and hesitation. "I don't usually do this," he said slowly. "But I can't just drive away and leave you like this. Come with me for one night. I have a guest room. You can rest, eat something warm, take a proper shower." Emily blinked. "What, I can't do that? Why not?" "Because I barely know you." He met her eyes steadily. "Then get to know me. You can leave any time you want. I'm not asking for anything, I just don't want you to spend the night in this freezing apartment." Her heart raced. It was crazy. She should say no. She knew she should say no. But she thought about the cold that seeped through her windows every night, the heater that coughed instead of blowing heat, the emptiness waiting inside. And she thought about the warmth of his car, the kindness in his voice, the strange safety she'd felt since stepping inside. She bit her lip. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "Yes, come on. You're coming with me." Something about the way he said it, firm but gentle, made her heart twist. Not a command, not a demand, but a promise. She looked down at her worn shoes, then back at him. "Just for tonight," she said finally. "Just for tonight," he repeated. And for the first time in a long time, Emily followed someone else's lead. Not because she was weak, but because, for once, someone seemed to care. They walked back through the snow together, their footprints side by side, already beginning to fade beneath the falling white. The snow fell heavier as they drove away from the apartment building, the wind howling between the tall city towers. Emily sat quietly in the passenger seat, her hands folded on her lap, watching the world outside fade into white. She still couldn't believe what she was doing. Going home with a stranger? A man she had met less than an hour ago. Every sensible thought told her she shouldn't, but somehow she felt safe beside him. His calm voice, the gentle way he spoke, it didn't sound like danger. It sounded like care. Alexander kept his eyes on the road. The wipers fought against the snow, and the car moved carefully through the empty streets. Every few minutes he glanced at her just to make sure she wasn't too cold or uncomfortable. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "Yeah," she said, "just trying to believe this is real." He smiled a little. "I know it's strange. You don't have to trust me completely. Just rest for now." She looked at him, unsure how someone so composed could sound so genuine. He didn't look like the kind of man who usually stopped for strangers. Everything about him, his car, his clothes, his posture, spoke of a life far away from hers. Yet here he was, driving her through a storm. The city lights grew fainter as they left downtown and entered a quieter district where tall buildings gave way to wide streets and gated homes. Emily's breath fogged up the window as she looked out at the large houses with snow-covered roofs. It was another world, peaceful, rich, untouched by the kind of struggle she lived every day. Finally, the car turned down a long driveway lined with frozen trees. At the end stood a tall glass and stone house glowing softly through the snow. Emily's heart skipped. It didn't even look real. "This is where you live?" she whispered. "Yes," he said. "Don't worry. You're safe here." The gates opened automatically and the car slid into a heated garage. When the doors closed behind them, Emily felt the sudden quiet. The sound of the storm disappeared, replaced by the soft hum of warmth. She sat still for a second, nervous to move. Alexander got out first, walking around to open her door. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's get you warm." She stepped out, her boots crunching against the floor. He led her inside through a short hallway that opened into a living space that took her breath away. The room was wide and bright, even at night. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out at the snow-covered city below. The air smelled faintly of coffee and cedar wood. "Wow," she murmured. "This place is beautiful." He smiled faintly. "It's quiet, that's what I like about it." Emily felt awkward standing in her thin coat and worn shoes on the spotless wooden floor. She didn't know where to put her hands or what to say. He noticed. "Let me get you a blanket," he said. He disappeared into another room and returned with a thick gray throw, placing it gently around her shoulders. "There, that's better." "Thank you," she said softly. The warmth of the blanket made her realize how cold she really had been. Her fingers were still stiff. "Sit," he said, motioning toward the sofa near the fireplace. "I'll make something hot." "Coffee or tea?" "Tea, please." He nodded and headed toward the kitchen. The sound of running water and clinking cups filled the silence. Emily sat down carefully, afraid to dirty anything. Her eyes wandered over the space. The shelves were lined with books and a few framed photos, most of them of cityscapes or people in business meetings. There weren't any family pictures. It looked like a home that was beautiful but lonely. When he returned, he carried 2 mugs and a small plate of cookies. "They're not fresh," he said with a small grin, "but they'll do." She smiled. "This is more than I expected tonight." He sat across from her, watching as she wrapped her hands around the mug. "So," he said gently, "do you always take the bus that late?" She laughed softly, though it came out tired. "Pretty much every night. I work long shifts. Some nights I don't finish until after 11. Why not get a car?" She looked at him, then down at her tea. "I can't afford one. I'm still paying off school loans and my brother's treatment." He nodded slowly. "I see." She glanced up, surprised by his calm response. Most people changed the subject quickly when she mentioned money or her family. He didn't. "Your brother's sick?" he asked. "Yeah," she said quietly. "He has a heart condition. It's been hard, but he's getting better. I work extra shifts to cover the bills." "That's a lot to carry," he said. She shrugged. "You do what you have to. He's family." He nodded again, his eyes thoughtful. "Still, you shouldn't have to stand in the cold waiting for a bus. You deserve better." She smiled faintly. "I don't expect much. I just try to get through each day." They sat in silence for a moment. The fire crackled softly in the background. The warmth in the room started to melt away the stiffness in her shoulders. "You said you run a company?" she asked after a while. He nodded. "Yes, it started small years ago. Now it's grown more than I expected." "Must be nice," she said, not sarcastic but genuinely curious. "Having everything under control." He let out a short laugh. "You'd be surprised how little control success actually gives you. The more you have, the more you worry about losing it." She tilted her head. "That sounds exhausting." "It is," he admitted. "I spend most nights working. Some days I forget what it's like to talk to someone who isn't part of a deal or a contract." Emily smiled softly. "Well, tonight you talked to a freezing nurse at a bus stop." He chuckled. "Best conversation I've had in weeks." She laughed too, but it faded quickly as she looked into the fire. "It's funny," she said quietly. "When you work in a hospital, you see people at their worst. You see how fragile life is, and yet outside those walls, nobody seems to care. Everyone's in a rush, everyone's chasing something. It's like compassion doesn't fit into people's schedules anymore." He listened closely, his gaze steady on her. "Maybe it takes someone like you to remind the rest of us." She blushed slightly, looking away. "I'm just doing my job." That's exactly why it matters. For a long time they didn't speak. The storm outside kept raging, but inside the house there was only calm. Emily finished her tea, feeling warmth spread through her chest. She didn't want to admit it, but she felt comfortable here, something she hadn't felt in a long while. Alexander stood. "You must be exhausted. Let me show you the guest room." She hesitated. "I don't want to be a bother." "You're not," he said simply. He led her down a hallway with soft lights and opened a door at the end. Inside was a neatly arranged room with a big bed covered in fresh white sheets, a nightstand with a lamp, and a small window that looked out at the snow-covered yard. "This is too much," she said, standing at the door. "It's just one night," he said. "I'll bring you some fresh towels. There's a bathroom right across the hall. You can take a shower, get some rest." She turned to him, unsure how to express her gratitude. "Thank you, really. You didn't have to do any of this." He smiled faintly. "I know, but I wanted to." He left her alone, and for the first time in years, Emily felt out of place in the best possible way. The bed looked too soft, the air too warm, the space too clean. She took a long breath and sat on the edge of the bed, removing her shoes. Her feet ached, her back throbbed, but she felt lighter than she had all week. She took a hot shower, the kind that wrapped around her like a blanket. The water washed away the smell of disinfectant and exhaustion that clung to her every day. When she came out, wrapped in one of the soft towels he'd left, she caught her reflection in the mirror. The dark circles under her eyes looked softer, her skin less pale. For once, she didn't look like a ghost of herself. When she returned to the bedroom, she found a folded sweatshirt and a pair of warm pants on the bed. A note lay on top. They might be a bit big, but at least they're clean. Sleep well, she smiled. It was simple, but it meant more than words could explain. She changed into them and slipped under the blanket. The sheets smelled like lavender. Her eyes grew heavy almost immediately. She thought of the snow outside, of her small apartment, of how strange life could be, how one night could bring someone completely unexpected into your path. Before she drifted off, she whispered softly, "Thank you, whoever you are." In the other room, Alexander sat in his study, looking out through the glass at the storm. He could still hear the faint hum of the heater in the guest room. He wondered why he had done it, why he had stopped the car, why he cared. He wasn't the type to get involved in other people's problems. His world was made of schedules, profits, deadlines. Yet something about that moment at the bus stop had stirred something inside him he hadn't felt in years. He thought of the way she had shivered, but still smiled. The way she spoke about her patience with quiet pride. The way she said it's honest work like it was something to be humble about. He realized he couldn't remember the last time he met someone so real. For a long time, he just sat there staring at the snow, lost in thought. Finally, he turned off the light and went to his room. Morning came softly. The sky was still pale, the snow still falling, but the storm had eased. Emily woke up to the smell of coffee. She sat up slowly, unsure where she was for a moment. Then she remembered the car, the stranger, the warmth. She got up, folded the blanket neatly, and followed the faint sound of clinking dishes to the kitchen. Alexander was there in a gray sweater, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. "Good morning," he said with a smile. "Morning," she replied. "I'm sorry, I slept longer than I meant to." "You needed it," he said. "Sit down. Breakfast's ready." On the table were scrambled eggs, toast, and a small bowl of fruit. Nothing fancy, but it felt like luxury to her. She hadn't eaten breakfast in weeks that didn't come from a vending machine. "You didn't have to do this," she said, sitting down carefully. "I wanted to," he said again, the same gentle tone. "You've been taking care of everyone else. Let someone take care of you for once," she laughed softly. "I'm not used to that." "Then it's time you were." They ate in silence for a bit, the quiet between them easy and natural. She looked around again, taking in the soft light coming through the windows, the faint sound of the wind outside. It was peaceful. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt that way. After breakfast, she stood and said, "I should go. My shift starts this afternoon." "I'll drive you," he said immediately. "You don't have to." He raised an eyebrow. "You're not taking the bus in this weather," she smiled, shaking her head. "You really don't give people much room to argue, do you?" "Not when I'm right," he said, smiling back. When they reached her hospital later, she turned to him before getting out. "Last night, I don't know how to thank you." "You already did," he said. She looked at him for a long second. "You know, most people would have just driven past me." "I guess I'm not most people," he said softly. She smiled. "No, you're not." Then she stepped out of the car and hurried inside, her figure disappearing into the crowd of nurses rushing through the hospital doors. Alexander watched her go, feeling something strange, something he hadn't felt in years. As the snow began to melt on his windshield, he realized he didn't just help someone last night. Somehow, without meaning to, he'd let someone into his life. And part of him already knew this wasn't the end of it. It was just the beginning. The next few days went by in a blur for Emily. She went back to her shifts at the hospital, moving through long nights filled with beeping machines, tired patients, and the faint smell of antiseptic. But something had changed in her. She couldn't stop thinking about that night, about the warmth of his home, the way he had spoken to her, and how for once, she hadn't felt invisible. Alexander's face kept slipping into her thoughts, his calm eyes, His quiet voice, his unexpected kindness. She told herself it was silly. He was someone from a completely different world. A man who lived behind glass walls and drove cars she could never dream of owning. But even so, she couldn't help wondering if she'd ever see him again. She didn't have to wait long. It was a Thursday evening when she stepped out of the hospital after another exhausting shift. The cold air stung her cheeks and she pulled her coat tight around her. Just as she started walking toward the bus stop, she saw a familiar car parked at the curb. The window rolled down and there he was. "Need a ride?" he asked, smiling slightly. She froze. "You again?" she said, laughing softly. "I figured you'd be here," he said. "And I figured you'd still be walking in this cold." She hesitated. "You didn't have to come all the way here." "I know," he said. "But I wanted to." That sentence again. Simple, but it always sounded so sincere coming from him. She got in the car, trying not to smile too much. "You make this a habit, picking up freezing nurses?" He chuckled. "Just one." The ride was quiet at first, filled with the hum of the engine and the soft sound of the radio. She watched the snowflakes slide down the window while he drove carefully through the slick streets. "How was work?" he asked after a while. "Busy," she said. "There's never a slow day. But it's fine. I'm used to it." "Used to exhaustion?" he teased. She smiled faintly. "Something like that. You get numb after a while. It's strange. You care deeply about every person, but you can't let it break you every time someone leaves." He nodded thoughtfully. "That's something I can't imagine doing. My world is all numbers and results. Nothing like what you do." "I think your world's probably harder," she said. "At least I get to see faces, not just figures." He laughed softly. "You might be right about that." When he pulled up outside her building, she hesitated again. The same cracked steps, the same flickering light. It felt different now, standing beside his car in this quiet street. He looked at her. "Are you sure you're okay here?" "I'll be fine," she said. He didn't argue this time, but he didn't drive away either. "Can I take you to dinner sometime?" Her heart skipped. "Dinner?" He nodded. "Nothing fancy, just a meal where we don't talk about work or weather." She hesitated. "I don't really go out much." "Then it's time to start," he said simply. She smiled. "You don't give up easily, do you?" "Not when I mean something," he replied. She didn't answer right away, but something inside her melted a little. "All right," she said finally. "One dinner. Tomorrow?" She laughed. "You really don't waste time. Life's short," he said. "You should eat while it's still warm." She shook her head, still smiling. "Okay, tomorrow." He looked satisfied. "I'll pick you up at 7. And just like that, she went inside with her heart beating faster than it had in months. The next day, she stood in front of her small mirror, staring at her reflection with a nervous smile. She had spent an extra half hour trying to make her hair behave. She didn't own many nice clothes, but she chose her best dress, a simple dark blue one that made her eyes look brighter. She applied a touch of lip balm and told herself to breathe. It was just dinner, just food. But deep down she knew it meant more than that. When the doorbell rang, she felt her stomach flip. She opened the door and froze for a second. He looked different without the heavy coat, dressed in a black shirt and gray jacket, casual but sharp. "You look," he started, then stopped, smiling instead. "You look nice." "Thank you," she said softly. "You too." He led her to the car and they drove toward the city. This time she wasn't nervous. There was something easy about being around him, even in silence. He took her to a quiet restaurant tucked behind a row of small shops. The place wasn't fancy, just warm lighting, soft music, and the smell of good food. It felt cozy and real. "I didn't want to go anywhere formal," he said as they sat down. "You've had enough of rules and uniforms, I think." She smiled. "You read people well." "I just listen," he said. The waiter brought their food, and for a while they talked about little things: music, books, strange patients, and childhood stories. She told him about growing up with her brother, about how they used to pretend the hospital was a spaceship when they were kids. He laughed, not mockingly, but like he could actually see it. Then she asked, "What about you? What were you like as a kid?" He leaned back, thoughtful. "Quiet, mostly. My parents worked a lot. I spent a lot of time alone. I think that's why I got good at business. I like solving things by myself." "Do you still see them?" she asked gently. He shook his head. "They passed away a few years ago. Heart attack." It was sudden. Her smile faded. I'm sorry. He nodded. It happens. But it made me realize how fast everything can disappear. Maybe that's why I work so much. She looked at him, her voice soft. You know, working hard isn't the same as living. He met her eyes, and for a moment something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. After dinner, they walked outside. The snow had stopped, leaving the streets wet and shining under the streetlights. He walked beside her, hands in his pockets, his breath visible in the cold. Do you ever wish you could start over? She asked suddenly. He thought for a moment. Sometimes. But maybe starting over isn't about going back. Maybe it's about meeting someone who makes you want to be different. She stopped walking and looked at him. The way he said it, quiet, honest, made her chest tighten. I think everyone deserves that, she said softly. He smiled. Maybe you're right. When he dropped her home that night, he didn't ask to come in. He just looked at her and said, Good night, Emily. Good night, Alexander, she said. He waited until she was safely inside before driving away. That became their routine. He'd pick her up after work sometimes, or they'd grab a coffee between shifts. Sometimes they talked for hours. Sometimes they didn't talk at all. It didn't matter. What mattered was that for the first time in a long time, both of them had someone who saw them. One evening, a few weeks later, she invited him to visit the hospital. He hesitated at first, saying it wasn't really his place, but she insisted. You should see what real work looks like, she teased. He finally agreed. When he walked through the hospital doors, dressed in his tailored coat, the nurses whispered and smiled. Emily led him down the hall, introducing him to the staff, to the patients, to the smell of disinfectant and the steady rhythm of life and pain mixed together. He watched her move through the ward, helping an old man with his blanket, listening to a child who was afraid of injections, smiling at every person like they mattered. He realized then that she wasn't just kind, she was strong, stronger than most people he knew. Later in the break room, he said, You do all this every day? She shrugged. Someone has to. You could do anything, he said quietly. Why this? Because it matters, she said, even when it hurts. He looked at her and something shifted inside him. That night, as he drove home, the city lights blurred past his windshield and all he could think about was her. How she lived with so little yet gave so much. He thought about how empty his big house felt and how quiet his life really was. Over the next few weeks, he started showing up more often. Not just at her work, but in small ways that surprised her. One morning, she found a new pair of gloves waiting at her locker with a small note that said, Stay warm. Another time, when her brother's medication bill came up short, she found an anonymous payment already made at the pharmacy. She knew it was him, even though he never mentioned it. When she confronted him one evening, saying he didn't have to do any of that, he just said, I know, but I wanted to, and she couldn't argue with that anymore. The more time they spent together, the less the world outside seemed to matter. They were two people from different sides of life, but they shared the same kind of loneliness, the same desire to belong somewhere. One night, as they sat in his living room again, watching the snow fall through the big windows, she said quietly, Do you ever think about where you'll be in 10 years? He looked at her. I used to. Now I think more about where I am right now. She smiled faintly. And where's that? He didn't answer immediately. Right where I want to be, he said finally. The silence after that was soft and full of meaning. She felt her chest warm, not from the fire, but from the feeling that something real was growing between them, something she hadn't expected when she stood freezing at that bus stop weeks ago. Before she left that night, she stood at the door, hesitating. You know, she said softly, you never really told me why you stopped that night. He looked at her, his voice low. Because you looked like someone who needed to be seen. And maybe I needed to see someone like you. She didn't know what to say. For a long second, they just looked at each other. Then she smiled, whispered goodnight, and walked out into the falling snow. He watched her go, a quiet smile on his face, realizing that somehow, without planning it, his life was no longer the same. And she, walking home under the white glow of the streetlights, knew that something inside her had changed forever too. Would you like me to create part 3 as a downloadable Word, .docx, or PDF file, so you can use it for narration or upload directly? You said to write part 4 in 3,000 words without heading. in simple English words in a separate document. It should be interesting and every part should be engaging so the audience doesn't get bored. Also keep the wording simple and natural tone. Also make the script human-centric and don't give feel of AI generated. Also don't create violated content which can affect YouTube policy. Also don't use names like Marcus, Sarah, Emma, Jamal, etc. Give me text. ChatGPT said, understood. Here's part 4 of your story, written in simple, natural English with a realistic human tone. It's designed to be emotionally engaging, perfect for storytelling or YouTube narration. There's no violent or sensitive content, and it stays fully policy safe. The winter started to fade, and the first signs of spring slowly appeared around the city. The days were still cold, but there was a hint of warmth in the air. People walked a little slower, smiled a little more, and for once the streets didn't feel so lonely. For Emily, life had changed in quiet, steady ways. Her world was still busy, full of night shifts, tired eyes, and endless patience, but something inside her had softened. There was lightness now, something that made her wake up with purpose. She and Alexander saw each other often. Sometimes they met for dinner, sometimes for coffee, sometimes just to sit in the park after her shift. They didn't always talk about big things. Some days they just watched the world move around them. It was the kind of silence that didn't need filling. But the closer they grew, the more Emily started to worry. Not because of him, he was kind, patient, and never pushed her. It was because she didn't understand what she meant to him. He was a man with everything: money, power, control. And she was someone who still counted every coin before paying rent. Their worlds were miles apart, and even though he never made her feel small, she sometimes wondered if she belonged anywhere near him. One afternoon, while sitting in the hospital cafeteria, one of her co-workers leaned over. "Is it true you're seeing that rich businessman? The one who drives the black car?" Emily froze mid-sip. "What? No, we're just friends." Her co-worker smirked. "Sure. Friends who show up in suits to pick you up after every shift? That kind of friend?" She laughed it off, but the comment stayed with her. People noticed. They talked, and Emily hated being the center of attention. That evening she met Alexander at the park near the river. The sun was setting, painting the sky in gold and pink. He smiled when he saw her walking toward him holding 2 cups of coffee. "You look tired," he said gently. "Long day," she admitted. "But this helps." She handed him one of the cups. He took it with a grateful smile. "You always bring coffee. I should start returning the favor." "You already do too much," she said. He tilted his head. "Do I?" She nodded. "You don't have to keep doing things for me, Alexander. I don't want people to think I'm—" She stopped herself, but he caught it. "Think you're what?" he asked softly. She sighed. "Taking advantage of you." He was quiet for a moment, looking at the river. "Is that what you think?" "No," she said quickly. "I just don't want people talking. It's hard enough already. At work, everyone's whispering. I don't want that kind of attention." He turned to her, his expression calm but serious. "Let them talk. You know who you are. I know who you are. That's all that matters," she smiled faintly. "It's not that simple." "Maybe not," he said. "But the world rarely is. You can't live your life worrying about what others think." She looked down at her cup. "That's easy for you to say. You don't have to face them every day." He didn't argue. He just nodded slowly. "You're right. But I can promise you something. Whatever people say, I'll be here." Something in his voice steadied her. It wasn't a grand promise. It was quiet and real. They sat on the bench for a while, watching the last of the sun disappear. For a moment she wished time could stop right there. Simple, peaceful, and safe. The next week, everything seemed to move faster. His business demanded more of his attention, and she was covering double shifts. Days went by without them seeing each other, and though they texted often, she missed him. One night after a particularly rough shift, she found herself standing outside his office building. She hadn't planned it. She just needed to see him, to feel like she wasn't drifting away. The building looked even taller at night, its glass walls reflecting the city lights. She hesitated at the entrance, wondering if she was making a mistake. But before she could turn back, the elevator doors opened and he stepped out. "Emily," he said, surprised but happy. "What are you doing here? I didn't mean to interrupt," she said. He smiled, walking toward her. "You could never interrupt." Inside his office, the world felt different. It was all sleek furniture and glowing screens. But the moment she sat down, it felt strangely calm. "You look exhausted," he said, studying her face. "I think I'm just tired of everything," she admitted softly. He leaned forward. "Then take a break. Come with me tomorrow." "Just for a day," she frowned. "Where?" "Somewhere quiet. You'll see." "I can't," she said quickly. "I have work. I'll handle it," he said. "You deserve one day, Emily." She hesitated. She wanted to say no, to be practical, but something inside her whispered yes. The next morning, he picked her up early. The city was still half asleep as his car rolled through the streets. She didn't know where they were going, and he didn't say. After an hour, they reached a wide stretch of countryside, fields, trees, and sunlight everywhere. They stopped near a lake, calm and still, reflecting the clear sky. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. "I used to come here as a kid," he said. "It's the one place that never changed." They walked by the water, shoes crunching on gravel, the air filled with birdsong. For the first time in weeks, Emily felt her shoulders relax. "Do you ever think about leaving it all behind?" she asked suddenly. He smiled faintly. "All the time. But I built something I can't just walk away from. Even if it's making you tired." He looked at her, then out at the water. "It's not the work that makes me tired. It's doing it alone." The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. She looked at him, really looked at him, beyond the expensive suit, beyond the confidence. There was something lonely there, something she recognized in herself. They sat on a fallen log near the edge of the lake, talking for hours. About life, about fear, about dreams they never said out loud before. He told her he didn't have many friends he could trust. She told him how she used to draw when she was younger, but stopped because there was never time. "Maybe you should start again," he said. "You were meant to do more than just survive." She smiled softly. "Maybe, but it's hard to believe that sometimes." He looked at her, his eyes gentle. "Then I'll believe it for you." Those words stayed with her long after they left the lake. When they got back to the city, it was evening. She didn't want the day to end, but she knew it had to. As he dropped her off, she lingered by the car door. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For today. For reminding me what peace feels like," he smiled. "Then promise me something. Don't forget it again." "I'll try," she said, her voice barely a whisper. But peace never lasts long. A few days later, something unexpected happened. A news article appeared online, showing a photo of them together outside the restaurant from a few weeks ago. The headline read, "Mysterious woman seen with reclusive CEO, who is she?" Emily found out from a co-worker, who showed her the article on their phone. Her stomach dropped as she read it. The comments were even worse, people speculating, assuming, judging. She felt exposed, like her life had been pulled out into the open. That evening, she called Alexander. "Did you see it?" "I did," he said calmly. "What do we do?" She asked. "Nothing," he said. "It'll pass. But my co-workers are already talking. Everyone's looking at me differently." "I can't, Emily," he interrupted softly. "Don't let them define your truth." She didn't answer. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she held them back. "This isn't your world, Alexander. People like me don't belong in your stories." He went quiet for a moment. "You think I care about that?" "I think you don't realize what this means for me," she said, her voice shaking. "I can't afford to lose my job because of gossip." "I would never let that happen," he said. "You can't control everything," she whispered. There was a pause, long and heavy. "Then tell me what you want me to do," he said quietly. She didn't know. All she wanted was for things to go back to the way they were, quiet, simple, safe. But she knew they couldn't. "I need some time," she said finally. He nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "If that's what you need, I'll wait." The next few weeks were hard. She threw herself into work, avoiding his messages, keeping her head down. But at night, when the world went quiet, she thought about him. About the lake, the laughter, the warmth in his eyes. She missed him. More than she wanted to admit. One night, she was leaving the hospital when she saw him standing by the entrance. He looked tired, like he hadn't been sleeping much. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. "I know," he said, "but I couldn't stay away anymore." "Alexander," she started, but he stepped closer. "I don't care what anyone says," he said quietly. "You matter to me. That's not something I'm going to apologize for." Her throat tightened. "You don't make this easy." Love never is, he said, his voice low but steady. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was filled with everything unsaid. Then she sighed, a small smile tugging at her lips. You're impossible. Maybe, he said. But I'm still here. And in that moment, she realized she didn't want him to leave. No matter what the world said, the snow had melted. The nights were warmer now. But something else was changing too. Something neither of them could stop. What began as a simple act of kindness on a freezing night had turned into something neither expected, something that was slowly becoming the center of both their lives. And though they didn't know what the future held, they both knew one thing for sure: neither of them was walking away anymore. The days grew warmer and the city began to bloom again. Trees lined the sidewalks with fresh leaves and the scent of rain hung in the air. Life went on, as it always does. But for Emily and Alexander, everything felt different now. They had gone through silence, whispers, and questions from the outside world. But somehow, through all of it, they found their way back to each other. It wasn't easy. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. Emily had stopped worrying so much about what people said. Maybe it was because she finally understood that happiness wasn't something others could give or take away. Maybe it was because every time she saw him waiting outside the hospital after her shift, she remembered how far they had both come. He didn't show up every night anymore. His work kept him busy, and her shifts were unpredictable. But when they did see each other, they made every moment count. Sometimes they walked by the river and talked about nothing. Sometimes they sat in silence and let the world move around them. One evening they met at a small cafe tucked between two old bookshops. It was quiet there with soft lights and the smell of fresh pastries. "You've been busy," she said, stirring her tea. "So have you," he replied with a smile. "Every time I try to see you, they tell me you're covering someone else's shift again." She smiled tiredly. "They need me," he leaned forward. "And who's taking care of you?" She looked down at her cup. "I've managed before." "I know," he said softly. "But you don't have to anymore." She met his eyes. "That sounds easy when you say it." He reached across the table and took her hand. "It's not easy. It's a choice. One you deserve to make for yourself." The warmth in his voice made her chest tighten. He had a way of saying things that made her feel safe, seen, and strong all at once. After that night, something shifted again between them. Not in words, but in the quiet understanding that they were both part of something that neither of them wanted to lose. But life, as it always does, had its own plans. A week later, the hospital where Emily worked announced budget cuts. Departments would be reduced and many staff members would be reassigned. Emily's position wasn't directly threatened, but the uncertainty in the air made everyone uneasy. She stayed late every day, helping the team, making sure the patients were cared for despite the chaos. One night she came home so tired she could barely keep her eyes open. When she unlocked her door, she found a small box waiting on the step. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a tiny charm shaped like a feather, and a note that simply said, "For when the days feel heavy." She didn't have to guess who it was from. The next morning, she saw him waiting by his car, hands in his pockets, looking like he hadn't slept either. "You should be resting," she said, walking up to him. "So should you," he said gently, "but we both know neither of us will." They stood there for a moment, the early sun glowing on their faces. Then he said, "Come with me this weekend. I want to show you something." She frowned. "Another surprise?" "Just one last one," he said with a faint smile. Saturday came and he drove her out of the city again. The air felt cleaner the farther they went. After 2 hours, they reached a wide open field surrounded by tall trees. In the middle stood an old quiet house with a wraparound porch and flowers growing wild around it. Emily looked at him. "What is this place?" he smiled. "My parents' old home. I used to come here when I needed to think. I've been fixing it up for months." She turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. The breeze carried the smell of grass and soil. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "I wanted you to see it," he said. "Because I'm moving out here." She froze. "You're leaving the city?" He nodded. "I need something real. The board can handle the company without me for a while. I've spent years building everything except a life. It's time." She stared at him, unsure what to say. He stepped closer. "And I was hoping you'd come with me." The world seemed to go quiet around her. She blinked, unsure she'd heard him right. "You mean, live here?" He nodded again. Not right away. I know you have work. But someday, I want this to be a place for both of us, a home, not just a house. Her heart ached in the best way. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to say no. Everything in her life had been built on responsibility, on fear of losing stability. But looking at him now, she realized that maybe stability wasn't about standing still.